Imagine waking up, checking the news, and just realizing the political system that survived, the Blitz, the Cold War, the 2008 financial crisis, it just vanished overnight.
Yeah, completely gone.
Right. Because when we usually talk about historical shifts, we tend to think of them like, I don't know, erosion, like water slowly carving a canyon over decades. But occasionally you aren't watching erosion, you're watching an earthquake.
Exactly. And that's exactly where we are today.
Yeah, today is Friday, May 8, 2026, and the United Kingdom has just experienced an electoral seismic event that has completely upended a century of established history.
We're really looking at the absolute shattering of the post-war bipartisan equilibrium in Britain. The structures that have governed one of the world's most prominent democracies have fundamentally ruptured.
Completely ruptured. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly how that two-party system broke apart this week. We're digging into a comprehensive new report titled The Global Review by Dr. Farid Novin, and it analyzes the staggering results of the UK's May 2026 local and devolved elections.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. And we want to understand the structural, sort of economic, tectonic plates that caused this rupture, and why this domestic shift has massive geostrategic implications for the entire world, specifically the G7 and NATO. But before jumping in, we need to note that our source document analyzes some heavily polarizing, politically charged developments across both left-wing and right-wing spectrums. As always, we are completely impartial here. We are not taking sides or endorsing any of the political viewpoints or movements mentioned. Our goal is simply to act as your guides, impartially conveying the facts and ideas as they are presented in the original source material.
Right, because the focus of the analysis is strictly on the mechanics of what happened at the ballot box, the underlying socioeconomic drivers, and, the cascading effects those results will have on international alliances.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because I read the raw numbers from this week's elections in the report, and they are just, well, they're jaw-dropping.
Unbelievable, really.
The bipartisan system, Labour and the Conservatives, it looks like it effectively collapsed. Reform UK secured 27% of the national equivalent vote, taking over 1,400 council seats across England and gaining control of more than 10 local authorities.
Yeah, it's a massive shift.
But before we get into the implications, I need some help with the terminology here. What exactly is a national equivalent vote? How does that differ from, just counting the ballots?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's a critical metric for understanding the sheer scale of this shift because local elections in the UK, they don't happen everywhere all at once.
Oh, right.
Yeah, only specific councils vote in a given year. So the national equivalent vote, it takes those fragmented, localized results and projects them mathematically across the entire country.
Got it.
It basically asks the question, if the whole country had voted today in a general election, what would the national vote share look like? And hitting 27% on that metric, well, it means Reform UK is no longer a fringe protest group. They are a massive institutional force.
Wow. And the upheaval wasn't confined to just the right side of the political spectrum either.
Not at all.
Because the Green Party, under the leadership of Zach Polanski, they surged to 14% of the vote. They gained 363 councillors. What really caught my eye was their breakthrough into actual executive power.
Yes, the mayoralties.
Exactly.
Yes.
They won directly elected mayoralties in Lewisham and Hackney, where Zoe Garbett just became the party's first ever directly elected mayor. Meanwhile, the establishment parties just took a historic beating.
A total wipeout.
Yeah. The Conservatives lost nearly 300 councillors and lost control of every single council they previously held. Every single one. And Labour lost control of 28 English councils.
The board was entirely wiped clean because, for a century, the British electoral system has relied on a mechanism called first past the post.
Right.
In each local area, whoever gets the most votes wins the seat, even if they only have, say, 30% of the total vote. And historically, this system brutally punishes smaller parties because their votes are spread out way too thinly across the country.
I was actually trying to visualize how that specific electoral system creates such a sudden shock. And I kind of think of first past the post like a magnifying glass.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, usually that magnifying glass diffuses the light of third parties. If you get 15% of the vote spread evenly everywhere, you get almost zero actual power. But once an insurgent party, like Reform, hits a specific concentration of votes in a concentrated geographic area.
The glass focuses.
Yes. That magnifying glass focuses the sun into a laser beam. It suddenly converts a moderate bump in overall vote share into massive completely disproportionate seat wins.
The laser beam analogy is perfectly apt, because if you look back at the 2024 general election, Reform's 14% of the national vote only got them 5 parliamentary seats.
Only 5.
Yeah, it was incredibly inefficient. It cost them roughly 800,000 votes per seat. But by crossing the 25% threshold in very specific geographical areas, specifically, northern metropolitan boroughs and struggling coastal towns, the electoral geometry totally inverted.
It started working for them.
Exactly. The system suddenly started rewarding their geographic concentration.
But then I was looking at the data from Wales in the report, and the numbers are completely different. The map didn't light up the same way at all. Why didn't Reform get that same laser beam effect there?
Well, Wales acts as the perfect control group because their devolved parliament, the Senedd, uses a totally different electoral system.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they use a proportional system called the Daunt method. It's actually designed to accurately reflect the fragmentation of the vote rather than distorting it through a winner-take-all magnifying glass.
Okay, so it shows what people actually wanted.
Precisely. The results in Wales provide an unfiltered look at voter sentiment. Blad Cymru won 43 seats, Reform took 34, and Welsh Labour, the party that has dominated Welsh politics for over a century, they collapsed to just 9 seats.
That is just wild. A century of uninterrupted dominance, completely erased in a single cycle.
What's fascinating here is how the political leaders themselves are framing this institutional reality. The source quotes Nigel Farage stating outright that Reform has eaten Labour for lunch.
Wow.
And on the progressive side, Zach Polanski declared that two-party politics is no longer dying, it is dead.
Dead. Just wow.
And these are accurate descriptions of a structural rupture. I mean, insurgent parties now have direct control over local public services, housing budgets, planning decisions.
So the natural question is how voters even reach this point. I mean, you don't just abandon a political system that survived the Great Depression and World War II on a whim.
No, absolutely not.
The transition from this domestic electoral shock to the underlying economic tectonic plates explains a lot. The report digs into the trades union data, showing the UK has suffered the longest sustained pay squeeze since the 2008 financial crisis.
It's been brutal for the average worker.
Right. And you compound that total wage stagnation with years of public sector austerity, the friction of Brexit on everyday trade, and the massive energy price shocks from the Russo-Ukrainian war.
Well, those economic pressures, they act as an accelerant for institutional decay. The source highlights a metric that basically defines this entire crisis. By 2022, institutional trust in the UK had plummeted to just 24%.
24%. That places Britain on par with historically unstable democracies like Brazil.
Exactly. And when institutional trust drops to 24%, the basic mechanisms of a democracy just stop functioning. People stop believing official government statistics about inflation or employment.
They just assume they're being lied to.
Right. They stop participating in community initiatives, and most dangerously, they view any attempt at political compromise by the establishment not as pragmatism, but as corrupt betrayal. The social contract fundamentally voids itself.
The report attributes that collapse in trust to a severe socioeconomic fracture. It's like the UK is essentially split into two totally incompatible economies sharing the exact same landmass.
That's a great way to put it.
You have a thriving, financially integrated metropolitan economy. So London, the satellite cities, professional services, the knowledge sector, and then you have the peripheral economy. These are the former industrial heartlands and coastal towns, suffering from severe manufacturing decline, deep housing insecurity, and total wage stagnation.
And the physical and economic divide between those two economies has completely destroyed the old concept of class identity in British politics.
Interesting. How so?
Well, cultural and civilizational identity has basically replaced traditional class solidarity as the primary driver for working class voters. The report points to Doncaster as the ultimate proof of this shift.
Ah, Doncaster. Because Doncaster historically was the absolute fortress for labor. It was the textbook definition of their union-backed working-class base. So losing it to reform in 2025 just proves the old rules are gone. Voters in that peripheral economy are casting their ballots based on cultural preservation and economic grievance, not the traditional Union Party nexus.
Exactly. And the focal point of that cultural anxiety is immigration. which the source identifies as the central strategic variable of this entire crisis. It presents an irreconcilable contradiction for any governing party.
Because they need the workers.
Right. Economically, the UK desperately needs immigrants. They have a rapidly aging population, a welfare state that requires tax revenue to survive, and severe structural labor shortages in healthcare, construction, logistics, you name it.
It's like trying to brake and accelerate a car at the exact same time. The economic engine needs the fuel of immigrant labor just to keep the hospitals running and houses being built. But the voters in these peripheral areas are slamming their foot on the political brakes.
Yes.
They are demanding drastic reductions because they perceive immigration as the primary cause of intense local housing shortages and overwhelming pressure on the National Health Service.
The state requires one policy to function, and the Democratic mandate is furiously demanding the exact opposite.
But I know Prime Minister Keir Starmer tried to address this. The report references a May 2025 white paper where Labor actually pivoted to the right on immigration, right? They promised reduced net migration and tougher compliance measures. So why did that strategy backfire so spectacularly at the ballot box this week? Didn't Labor try to play both sides to hold the country together?
They did, but by attempting to straddle the divide, Labor triggered a collapse on both of their flanks simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
Shifting right on immigration completely alienated their progressive metropolitan base. Those urban voters, they prioritize expansive climate policy, aggressive public housing initiatives, and notably, a totally different approach to foreign policy, specifically protesting Labor's stance on the Gaza conflict.
Right, so they just left.
Exactly. Feeling alienated, that massive metropolitan voting bloc abandoned Labor and flocked to the Greens.
So Labor bled out from the left in the cities, but they still lost the peripheral towns too.
Yeah, because the rightward shift on immigration was perceived by the peripheral voters as entirely performative, just too little, too late. It failed completely to win those voters back from Reform UK, who offered a much harder, uncompromising stance. The political center isn't just naturally weakening, it is being actively and aggressively hollowed out from both directions.
So, okay, the UK is deeply fractured at home. But Britain isn't just some isolated island. It's a nuclear power. It holds a permanent seat on the UN Security Council and serves as a core pillar of the Western world. When a global anchor of that magnitude starts to drift, the ripples hit every major alliance they belong to.
Absolutely.
The report points out that this turbulence isn't happening in isolation either. There is a deep synchronization happening across the entire Anglosphere right now.
Yeah, the UK's domestic instability perfectly mirrors the current political environment in the United States under the Trump administration. Alongside similar, intense populist pressures building in Canada and Australia,
It's everywhere.
they are all facing the exact same structural forces: the fallout of globalization, technological disruption, and demographic shifts.
And if all these countries experience systemic domestic instability at the exact same time, the shared architecture of the West is at serious risk.
Think about the operational realities of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, or the IUQS defense partnership between Australia, the UK, and the US. Those monumental security agreements were designed under the assumption of domestic political stability.
Right.
When multiple members are actively fighting populist insurgencies at home, alliance management becomes incredibly fragile. Leaders are too focused on surviving the next news cycle to commit to 20-year strategic defense projects.
We are already seeing those cracks manifest in defense funding, too. The source quotes General Richard Barrons, the former commander of British Strategic Command, explicitly warning of a serious defense budget deficit.
That's a terrifying quote.
The timing of this domestic funding crisis is terrible. I mean, in May 2026, the Trump administration announced the withdrawal of 5,000 U.S. troops from Germany. The United States is actively shifting the European security burden onto its NATO allies. At the exact moment, British voters are demanding every available pound be spent on local housing and healthcare rather than the military.
And the pressure on the UK's defense posture isn't just financial, it's deeply ideological. We discussed the massive gains made by the Green Party in metropolitan strongholds.
Right.
While their ideology pushes a highly redistributive, post-national, and non-aligned posture on Middle Eastern conflicts. They strongly emphasize domestic climate adaptation spending over international military expenditure. Their growing influence in local and national politics directly challenges the UK's historic Atlanticist consensus that has existed since 1945.
And it gets even more complex when you factor in the territorial integrity of the UK itself. The Scottish National Party, under First Minister John Swinney, retained power in Holyrood, and their foundational mandate is securing Scottish independence. Which brings up a massive existential threat to NATO, the nuclear issue. Because the UK's nuclear deterrent, the Trident submarines, are housed at the Faslane and Coalport bases, which are located in Scotland.
And the SNP's political platform is strictly anti-nuclear. In the event of Scottish independence, they would refuse to host Trident.
Wow. Where would they even put them?
That's the problem. Moving an entire nation's nuclear infrastructure isn't just a matter of finding a new dock. You need deep water locks with direct access to the open ocean, highly specialized nuclear safety facilities, massive secure storage for warheads. Defense analysts view relocating Trident as a logistical and financial nightmare, to the point of being strategically unmanageable without fundamentally degrading Britain's nuclear readiness.
So what does this all mean? I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a NATO ally. Imagine trying to negotiate a massive, multi-decade international security treaty with a country that doesn't know who will be in charge in 3 years, doesn't know if its citizens will even fund military, and doesn't even know if Scotland will still be part of the nation to host its nuclear submarines.
It's an impossible environment for long-term strategic planning.
Totally impossible.
Yeah.
And Dr. Novan's report doesn't just diagnose the current paralysis, right?
Yeah.
It utilizes Bayesian probabilistic forecasting to map out where the UK is heading between now and 2030.
Yes.
And Bayesian forecasting is fascinating because it doesn't treat the future as a fixed destiny. It's essentially like a navigation app on your phone. It assigns probabilities to different routes, and as new data comes in, like hitting a sudden traffic jam, or in this case, the May 2026 election results, the algorithm updates the probabilities of your arrival time.
That's a brilliant way to explain it.
Thanks. The report outlines 4 specific scenarios.
Right, so scenario 1 is managed fragmentation, and the model considers this the most probable outcome. The UK remains technically governable, but the state is significantly weakened. Heading into the 2029 general election, no single party secures a majority.
Just gridlock.
Basically, yeah. Labour might survive as the largest entity, but they are forced to rule as a fragile minority government or stitch together a messy, single-issue coalition. The daily reality of Scenario 1 is grinding gridlock. Every piece of legislation becomes a brutal negotiation, making rapid responses to international crises nearly impossible.
Just a slow, exhausting paralysis. But Scenario 2 introduces a much sharper shock.
Yeah. Scenario 2 is a Reform UK breakthrough. Following this week's results, the report gives this an elevated probability.
What would trigger that?
The triggers here would be mostly economic. So if migration stays stubbornly high or a deep recession hits the peripheral economy, the Conservative Party could completely collapse. Reform UK captures that entire voting bloc, achieves a plurality or even a working majority in 2029, and fundamentally realigns the country.
Wow.
The UK would execute a hard pivot toward national sovereignty, implement severe immigration restrictions, and adopt a highly transactional America First style approach to its NATO obligations.
That would change everything. Now, Scenario 3 swings the pendulum in the complete opposite direction, focusing on the progressive surge.
Scenario 3 is the Progressive Coalition realignment. It currently carries a lower probability, but it is conditionally elevated by specific potential crises. If the UK experiences an extreme housing market collapse or a severe tangible climate shock like catastrophic flooding, energized youth and Green voters could force a dominant left-wing coalition.
What would that look like in practice?
This arrangement would pull a weakened Labour government sharply to the left, introducing aggressive wealth taxation, intense rent controls, and fundamentally shifting the UK away from traditional defense spending in favor of green infrastructure.
Which brings us to the final projection, Scenario 4, the absolute nightmare scenario for Westminster.
Yeah, Scenario 4 is constitutional stress, and the model flags this as a rising long-term probability. This is a full-blown systemic crisis where the Westminster government is simply too paralyzed to manage the competing existential demands of the entire nation.
So it just breaks apart.
Exactly. You have an empowered Scottish government pushing relentlessly for independence from the north, rising demands for Welsh autonomy from the west, and an intense English nationalist reaction driven by reform in the center. The center entirely fails to hold, leading to a profound, unmanageable constitutional rupture.
That's terrifying.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the report makes a really sobering point about the global order. The immediate danger to the G7 and NATO isn't that the UK is going to suddenly collapse into a failed state. The real danger is what the analysis terms cumulative institutional exhaustion.
Cumulative institutional exhaustion. Because when a nation spends all of its political capital just trying to keep the lights on and the borders defined, there's nothing left for global leadership.
Exactly. Cumulative institutional exhaustion means the basic governing mandate erodes. Public trust vanishes entirely. The political spectrum becomes so heavily polarized and ideologically absolute that compromise becomes an act of political suicide. And compromise is the essential foundational currency of alliance management. If a nuclear-armed G7 nation cannot agree on its own budget, its own borders, or its own structural identity, it becomes incredibly costly and dangerously unpredictable for its allies to rely on it.
That makes total sense. Bringing it all together, the core takeaway from this deep dive is that the May 2026 UK elections are far more than a localized British political dispute. They are an advanced flashing warning system for the entire democratic world. They provide a real-time, undeniable case study of what actually happens when decades of slow economic stagnation and intense cultural anxiety finally build enough pressure to crack a century-old political foundation. If you're listening right now, it is absolutely worth looking at your own local governments and institutions.
No, absolutely.
Ask yourself, are these exact same structural forces, the wage stagnation, the housing shortages, the total collapse in institutional trust, creating the exact same fault lines in your backyard? Because as the report proves, the Anglosphere is deeply synchronized. The pressures are universal. The only variable is when the earthquake hits.
Well said.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. The report clearly demonstrates how a decade of wage stagnation and manufacturing decline completely fractured one of the world's oldest and most stable democracies. But here's the terrifying catch. All of that institutional decay happened before the true impact of artificial intelligence hit the workforce.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If our political systems are already buckling and shattering under the relatively slow economic pressures of the past decade, what happens to these fragile democracies when artificial intelligence completely rewrites the global labor market over the next 5 years? If the slow burn of traditional job loss caused this much political fragmentation and anger at the ballot box, what will an overnight AI-driven economic shock do to our political reality? Something to seriously think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.